I'm Anish Shropf, and I'm chopping it up with Buck.
So, gotta bring back, like I had Ludes on here, started thinking, I gotta get Anish on. Chopping it up with Buck came about sitting around during COVID, saying, let me call my boys and we just talk. So Bilatti's been on, Ludes has been on, I'm the other guys, Kevin Carter, but Anish Shropf, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Buck. Good to finally get this coveted invite.
So I'm gonna just tell you, Anish, when I first met you, I was like, man, this dude, Syracuse, I didn't know what to expect, right? I thought you were gonna be a little pompous, you guys have a great tradition up there. But man, we hit it off pretty well because we started talking books. I love that about you because sometimes you would just throw things. I was like, whoa, where did you get that one from? I like it. And we would bounce off of each other when we worked in the studio. But tell me how you started your progression from Bloomfield, New Jersey, into broadcasting and how that all come about.
Yeah, well, not all of us can be, 6'5" tight ends in the NFL, right? So, or center field for the Yankees or point guard for the Knicks. So, the dream took a detour. But I think at a young age, I always had a passion for sports, and I always enjoyed the storytelling. I tell the story a lot. We never had cable as a kid. So I'd listen to a lot of radio, and you're forced to use your imagination. You're forced to picture things. Yeah. And then when I did watch sports on TV, it was a lot of national broadcasts. And, one of the things that I remember struck me when I was young was the old NBA on NBC. And I would always try to get to the TV. This is pre-DVR, obviously, for that Bob Costas game open where he really sets the scene.
Yeah.
And you have the images, and he would make the words come alive with what you're seeing on screen. And I always thought, man, what a great way of just telling a story and bringing it into a broadcast, making it feel big. And, I think as a kid, you like that because it gave you the goosebumps. But the older I got, and as I got through high school, you started to appreciate the art behind it. When I went to college, those are the things that were implanted in your head. And so that's where the seeds really started, where you kind of said, hey, this is sports, but it's also a chance for us to tell some great stories and to make people feel a certain way.
You bring up a really good point. You were a really good tennis player in high school.
I would say good. I was 18.
So you couldn't. I think if you and Prim played, it would be competitive.
No.
Okay. Nope. All right. Yeah. So, but the thing about stories that you bring up is, I remember sneaking to watch Monday Night Football past halftime when I was growing up. Howard Cosell. And, and you talk about a guy that could embellish, but he brought you into it, and then all the other things that were around. I love football. But it was something about storytelling because my grandfather was a great storyteller. He would always talk about the Negro League players and he loved baseball. So my first love was baseball. And I agree with you. Whenever we have worked, that was the one thing I always liked because we had a chance to talk stories. We had a chance to kind of dig in and, talk about the human interest piece of folks. And, the other interesting thing about you, your parents are from Mumbai. Your dad is a professional photographer. So tell me about that, because that's really interesting. My daughter's an artist, and I'm always intrigued by those that grow up with artists or grow up with people that's a storytelling method as well.
Yeah. And I got a lot from him because when I was a kid, to make a few extra bucks, I would go work weekends with him. Yeah. He would go shoot a wedding. He used to have his own photo studio. He started one of the first 100 mini labs in the country. That's where he developed the film, the 1 hour photo. He developed his own stuff. He used to make his own filters and really had a knack and a skill. And he's been featured in galleries and all that kind of stuff. And then, he kind of got into the wedding business just because, it was a way to make a few extra bucks on weekends. And I would, go help him out, and I would hold the light. And the one thing that I noticed was, it's sort of the same in our business, right? our viewers, our listeners, they see the final product, but they sometimes see what goes into it. It's the old iceberg analogy. We see the tip of the iceberg. We don't see underneath. And I remember, he would get me up early, and I'm like, Dad, this thing doesn't start until 1 o'clock. Why are you getting there at 7 a.m.? But that created a type of work ethic in me where I would see what he would do. He would get there at 7 a.m. He had all his equipment, and he would just kind of go in and scout. Say, okay, what's going on here? We set up the light here. Okay, they're going to walk in this way. And sort of picturing everything before it happens. And then he would set everything up, and then things would happen. But it also allowed him a chance when things went in a different direction and didn't go as planned to adapt and adjust, because mentally he would just prepare for different scenarios. Oh, well, the forecast didn't call for rain, but now it's going to rain. What am I going to do? Okay, well, this is like indoors. If we need to take portrait pictures, we can take it here. There's good natural lighting. I'll bring this. Always having a backup plan. So I kind of got that from him. And then just this idea of thinking visually, thinking in a way where just because everybody is going right doesn't mean you need to go right. Sometimes the best picture is left. And sometimes I'm like, why is he going out here? And then I'd see the picture at the end. Oh, okay, I see what you did there. Right? Shooting things in a different way, shooting it from your back, shooting it through trees, finding different ways to crop the picture. And so, I was into photography, but never at the level that he was. And so for me, it was always, all right, how can I do this with 1,000 words? Right? Like, picture. And I wanted to do it with 1,000 words. And it was, how can we find a different way to get into this game? How can we find a different way to tell the story? One of my biggest pet peeves as a broadcaster, and you've probably been a part of this, is when you come on the air and someone says to the analyst, well, hey, Buck, this should be one heck of a game. Like, that's a cop-out. That's like just taking a Polaroid. And, the other thing I learned from him, and this was a lesson especially early in my career, his big pet peeve from clients when they would ask what camera he would use, like, you can have the best camera in the world, but if you're not a photographer or you can't see what you're supposed to see, or you see things a certain way, what difference does it make? And so he would say, you're not paying for my camera. You want a great camera, go buy one, or have your uncle buy one and take your pictures. You're paying me for how I see through the camera, right? And I learned that even, those old throwaway disposable cameras, with the right eye, you can take really good pictures through those.
What's crazy? People are now using Polaroid. They're going back to Polaroid pictures and doing some pretty cool things with them. It's amazing how that stuff has kind of come full circle.
Yeah, and the analogy is, depending on where we are or what games we're doing at certain times or at certain points in our careers, you're trying to do more with less. You may not have all the bells and whistles. How can you still dress it up? How can you take that creative, artistic picture with that disposable camera? So that's kind of something that I learned from him.
Well, and you talk about more with less. So I've watched your Syracuse guys because I've called plenty of games there, right? I think you guys all go to WAER. Is that football, basketball, and lacrosse. We'll talk football and basketball because, Syracuse had some down years, but they had been very strong before you had gotten there. But it's interesting when during your time, you became a really proficient person and got into the nuances with lacrosse. Because that's kind of how I saw you. I was like, oh, this guy's really good and he's excitable. Before I knew you and, before I knew really about you, I knew you loved lacrosse. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so lacrosse was a foreign language to me when I got to college. And I wanted to do football and I wanted to do basketball. And so at WAER, we were told, okay, you want to do those two? Learn lacrosse. I got to do that first. I remember my freshman year, I bought this Bob Scott book. He's a former Johns Hopkins coach, and it's essentially lacrosse for dummies before they had Subject for Dummies series. So I got that book, and I have it on my bookshelf behind me. And a few years ago, leafing through it, some of the things that I underlined, this is how many players on the field. This is the size. I literally didn't know anything. And then in New York, we also had a vibrant high school lacrosse scene. and it was covered by the local news and the local TV stations, almost like you would cover high school football in the fall.
Yeah.
And a lot of those players would go play at Syracuse or at big Division I schools. So I'd go to those high school games with a tape recorder, do practice tapes. But probably the biggest thing, we had a player when I was there by the name of Mikey Powell. Mm-hmm. He is on the Rushmore of college lacrosse. If you watch his highlight reel, you know, it's a cross section of Pete Maravich and Wayne Gretzky, just a magician. Yeah. And he's one of the 3 or 4 greatest players in the history of college lacrosse. His 4 years coincided with mine. So you're watching this transcendent talent for 4 years up close. So you go from covering the sport because you have to, and then after 4 years, you're walking away as a true fan of the sport because, again, you got to watch an all-time talent.
You know, you bring up a really good point. I grew up in Texas, so I didn't know about lacrosse. I knew about Jim Brown, but I knew about lacrosse before then, studying Native American history. Yeah. And so that was always one of those things that I was a guy that now when I watch lacrosse or go see the high school, I love it. I mean, I love the game. I love the physicality. But I think, you know, you can attest to this from being at Syracuse. There's talk that Jim Brown was probably one of the greatest lacrosse players of all time, along with Mikey Powell, and probably could have been, if it was a pro lacrosse league, would have been, you know, a Hall of Famer in that as well.
Well, if you listen to Jim Brown, he often says lacrosse was his first love. You know, that was his favorite sport. And he used to have a move that is now outlawed where he would pin the stick against his chest and literally run through people. They call that a bull dodge. And they said, you can't do that anymore.
That sounds like a rodeo term down in Texas.
I'll tell you what, there's a great story in Dick Schaap's memoir.
Okay.
Dick Schaap played goalie at Cornell, and he talks about facing Jim Brown when Cornell played Syracuse. And he said the guy had trees like telephone poles, but you never saw telephone poles move like that. And he remembers a game where he stopped a couple of shots, but he didn't see them. You know, Jim Brown is sort of like, it's hard to call him the Babe Ruth of lacrosse because the sport wasn't what it later became. Yeah. But he's almost like the Paul Bunyan of lacrosse. He's this larger than life tall tale.
Yeah. I mean, I almost equated for me from a Negro League baseball player, Josh Gibson. We always talk about Josh Gibson. And whenever I go to Washington, I got to go pay homage because I've heard Buck O'Neil talk about the only guy that he's ever heard the ball sound like that off the bat was Bo Jackson.
Yeah.
And Gibson. And just my grandfather got to see him play. So I'd always ask him because growing up a lefty, a power hitter, he was a right-hander. But I was always intrigued by that. And I kind of look at Jim Brown as that same kind of, the stories you hear. You don't have a lot of footage of him playing lacrosse, but you knew he was great.
Yeah, and you didn't have the statistics. Like you hear Josh Gibson hit 800 home runs. And
yeah.
Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard. That was Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig for the home.
Yeah.
And there is a little bit of that mythology. And it's funny you bring up the Negro Leagues because, I wish that we could have almost a definitive chronicle of some of those guys because all you do is you hear the stories, right? Like Cool Papa Bell. He was so fast turning the lights off and he beat the star, right? I mean, was he fast as Ricky Henderson? Was he fast?
Yeah.
And so it's part of this chapter of American history and American sports history that I've long been fascinated by. And it's just kind of, it's been buried under the surface for so long.
Yeah, I've gotten to know Dusty Baker well over the years. And Buck O'Neil was the one that I got to meet at Circle City Classic, spent a little bit of time with him. And he was the keeper of the Negro League stories. And he was a great storyteller as well. But he used to just tell me some of the great things about the games that actually took place between them, the major league teams and the Negro League teams. And he said it was very competitive. We beat them a lot, was what he would always say. And I think some of those guys didn't want to admit it, but it was such a competitive thing that I would love, like you, to just be able to be a fly on the wall and watch those things happen.
I mean, imagine if we could have seen Satchel Paige in his prime. We got Satchel Paige when he was old. He was in his 40s, and he was still waiting and fielding on Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Anish Shropf.
Hi guys, Dee Dee Wong here, and as you guys may know, I am an international award-winning speaker, I'm an entrepreneur, and I love investing in amazing products out there, one of which is now Thin Energy. It is a plant-based beverage. It has really huge hydration benefits. My favorite is the Peach Passion. I am so excited about this project. It's called Thin Energy. Please check it out.
All right, I'm back with Anish Shropf, and I'm not going to give any great analogies like he. But speaking of that, though, from a book perspective, what books kind of made you start thinking of sports? Because you always throw those little nuggets in. I don't know, some of the guys that you might do things with that goes over the head. It didn't go over my head. I was watching you do that.
Well, it's funny. There was a book that I read years ago. It was called "Only the Ball Was White" on the Negro Leagues, which is
okay. Oh yeah, that's a great book. Great book.
Tremendous, and it got into some of those stories and then some of the mythology and trying to separate a little bit of fact from fiction. But the sports books that hit home for me, one is Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn on the Brooklyn Dodgers. And, you know, the great thing about that book is it's in two parts. And the first part is, you know, the Boys of Summer in all their glory, you know, Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese and Joe Black and Carl Erskine. And then Roger Kahn revisits the Boys of Summer in the autumn of their lives. And it's a very human story. You know, we find out what happened to Jackie Robinson and how his son died, and Roy Campanella losing his legs, and, you know, different stories of success and tragedy and triumph, and really this battle of the human spirit, but also a portrait of your heroes as not superhuman, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When they're playing and they can do no wrong. And, you know, you think of a Kobe Bryant, right? Invincible, and now he's gone. So there was a lot of that in that book. Another one that I loved was Friday Night Lights.
Great book. Yeah.
Odessa Permian. Seabiscuit, which is more than just the story of a horse. One of the single best books I've ever read. Laura Hillenbrand's attention to detail and the way she's able to write nonfiction like fiction. You know, those are some that always just kind of struck me as sports books that I just thought were, you know, they're sports stories, but they're life stories.
Yeah. Boys in the Boat was another one that I read. I just started during COVID. I had a chance to read a lot more, but there were other things. But you just said something that triggered me. Earl Campbell was my idol growing up. You know, I'd see him work out. I got to know some of the Oilers, but he was almost like our god as a Houston Oilers fan. And now to see him, you know, as he's aged, just the wear and tear of his body, like all of us, at some point that happened. But I can remember going to the hill in Houston. It was this great workout hill that they would just try to kill you, 70 yards straight up turf. In the heat of Houston summers, guys would go out there a little bit hungover from hanging out the night before, and Tom Williams would work them to death. I saw Earl hit this hill so hard, Anish, it was after that, I was like, okay, that is what it's going to take for me to get to that level. That's just the entry into the game. And then he comes down and his thighs are the size of, you know, me and my buddies combined. But and what's up, young blood? I was like, and that moment, I was like, okay, this is what it's going to take to get there, right? So you had all the great guys in front of you at Syracuse. You started doing the things at WAER. You also you're on the reality show. What was it? The ESPN reality show. It wasn't a break for you, but it was a dream job, right? So yeah, second season of that. Just tell me about the progression and how you ended up getting to ESPN News and all the things you had to do to get to that level.
Yeah, it's funny. So, you know, dream job, I didn't win. I was in the final three. Yeah. And there were some opportunities after that. And I was very cautious about what I would take. And there were some things where what looked good in the short term may not have been beneficial in the long term. And I was 22 years old. I'd got a little bit of a taste. And I remember, you know, people thought I was crazy because I applied to Yakima, Washington, and I got a job in Yakima, Market 126. They're like, you're not going to try to cap off this dream job thing. And I go, no. I said, you know, that gave me a rough sketch of, I think, what it takes and what ESPN might be looking for one day. But I need to go to a place where I can cut my feet and get the reps. Had I won, I was not ready. And I knew that. I mean, I just knew that. I was 22 years old. I was right out of college. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that seat. And I had to go to a place where I could pay my dues. But
hey, Anish, how hard was it for you to say that, though? Because that's hard to do, or just really know that you're not ready. Because at 22, 23, I'm in the league, right? I'm playing pro football. I'm the guy, even though I might not be ready. That's what made you make that mature decision, or just that thought of, I'm not ready to do this yet?
Because I didn't want to be some flash in the pan. I didn't want to have an opportunity and then disappear. At Sirius, they teach you a first impression is a lasting impression.
Yeah.
And you go to ESPN and you're not ready, you're not going to last. And then it's incredibly difficult to maybe land on your feet somewhere else, and you may get back there. And you've seen that happen with certain people, right? And then all of a sudden they're put into a role, or they're put into a position where, it's frankly too much. And I wanted to go to a place where I said, this is a 20-year decision. I want to go to a place where I can work on myself, work on my craft, experiment. If I fail and if I don't succeed, I can at least come back to the drawing board and say, okay, what did I do wrong? How can I get better? And that was the biggest thing. And I went to Yakima, and I got to not only do my own sportscast at 5 and 6 o'clock, I was writing, producing, logging my footage, shooting my video, doing my own live shot editing. I basically did every job in the business in the man sports department in this bureau. And I was there for almost 2 years, and I walked away essentially like a minor leaguer would maybe after getting out of play, and says, you know what? I learned how to hit a curveball.
Yeah, you were almost like Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hour rule, right? I mean, some people look at that as wrong, but I really do think if you have the reps and you understand, like the high school games I did for almost, $150, the little college games that people don't watch, but then they see years, oh, you were doing that. Yeah, I mean, when they see you make it, they're like, how did you get there so quick? I'm like, man, it wasn't quick. I put in some time.
That was a job that paid $20,000 a year my first year there. And I lived in this 1-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town, and rent was about $400 a month. And for the first, 3-4 months, I could not afford a mattress. So I slept on a futon.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, but you remember those times. So as you progress and now you move from ESPNU to ESPN, getting bigger profile games, just tell me what that, because I often look back at where I came from, not where I'm at, because that keeps me hungry. What keeps you hungry and thriving now that you're the Carolina Panthers play-by-play voice? I mean, that's you've had some really nice progressions along the way in your journey. Talk a little bit about that.
I got to ESPN when I was still in my mid-20s, and I'm sure at that point in my career, I was really able to understand what that meant, appreciate it enough. You're always in that mode in your 20s. You're grinding. You're thinking what's ahead. It's very hard to stay present. Forget about looking back and reflecting. We're just not there yet from a maturity level. I still had some growing up to do. When this Panthers came about, there was a lot of reflection, a lot of humility, a lot of gratitude, a lot of thinking about the people who helped me get here, a lot of thinking about Bloomfield, New Jersey, where this journey started. And oh my God, I'm sitting in that last interview with, a billionaire owner. Like, kids from Bloomfield, New Jersey don't do that. And there was a very much of a pinch me moment. Is this happening? How is this guy whose, parents came here as immigrants? My dad, $6 in his pocket. We weren't, I always tell people, like, I went to Syracuse, but I wasn't like a lot of the Syracuse kids in that. Drove a 1986 Chevy Nova when I was in college. We didn't have a ton, and you're just like, man, how did I get here? And you're really appreciative of that entire odyssey. So I've been more reflective now than I probably was when I started at ESPN.
Hey, we're going to take a short break, come back, finish up with Anish. He's preparing for basketball, so he's always got things going. So we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back.
At Heslop Wealth Advisors, our goal is to help small businesses develop quality retirement plans for their employees through our Lunch and Learn seminars. We provide lunch and learning tools to help your company succeed and unmatched customer service.
Number 4, keep pounding.
Why did you pick number 4?
Because 4 is my favorite number.
Why is 4 your favorite number?
Because I love it.
All right, we're back with Anish Shropf, and I got to ask you, we were talking before your daughter. I remember when she was born, man, she got a love of the jersey number. Is it 4? What is that story? Talk to me about it.
We got her a Panthers jersey with number 4, and
okay.
What number do you want? She goes 4. Why do you want 4? Well, that's how old I am. So there wasn't anything more behind it than that. That's why she wanted 4, because she's 4 years old. And I said, you're still going to have this jersey when you're 5. And she goes, I know, but I'm 4 right now. So I'm hoping we're not buying her a different jersey every year.
Now, when you were coming back after that interview, sometimes when you have great interviews and you get home and you're talking to your wife who's a marathoner, I can remember when you guys were engaged and now married. So I love that. But when you came home and you started talking to her, what was the conversation? Did you know you had that did you crush it, or were you still unsure when you got back home?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I thought I had. I knew that was the last interview. I felt really good after the second interview. But that last interview, I honestly had no idea. I felt I had as good a shot as anybody, but again, you never know. And when you've been in my shoes, I've been turned down before for things that have been just out of my control, like my name. Years ago, I was up for a job in the Midwest in local news, and they said, "We love your stuff. We love the tape. We think you're good." Okay, so what's the problem? And it was the sports director who, told me in confidence he wanted to hire me, and he said, "I wish I could, but my news director won't let me because your name is too heavy." And all that stuff starts to cross your mind. You're never sure how that's play. And I'm thankful that for the Panthers, they looked at my resume, they looked at my body of work, and they looked at my credentials. But you're just never sure when you've traveled the path I have.
Hey, I totally understand that. I mean, when I saw you come in, I'm like, they got 2 Brown brothers on set tonight. We're going to tear it up. And, seriously, because back in the day, there never was that. It was maybe one of me, but it was always the other guys. So it was always cool to have different guys, different flavor, different things. And I think that's the part that I always love about sports, because you can go almost where it neutralizes a lot of things. There's still some knuckleheads, some people that are just stupid. But for the most part, when you sit and watch sports, it kind of levels the table. You can talk. I've been in locker rooms with guys I couldn't stand. Our politics were totally different, but we had to work together to make things happen.
And, that's sort of been the appeal of this job for me with the Panthers, beyond just doing play-by-play.
Yeah.
There is a community engagement component here as the voice of the team. And when you look at everybody, you got to say, hey, you're going to have male and female. You're going to have political beliefs all across the spectrum. You're going to have race and religion all across the spectrum. But you know what? On Sunday, we can all get together and unite under the banner of Keep Pounding. We can unite for black and blue and silver and white, right? We can unite. We can find some ground, and things are so divided right now. And we actively seek out fault lines. I mean, there are very real fault lines in our world and our society. Also others that we actively seek out just to further divide ourselves. And I always feel there's a healing power in sports, right? We can, you want to hate somebody, hate the Buccaneers, hate the
Yeah.
And so I actually, for me, that was a big part of it. Let's just try to bring people together on Sundays, and hopefully, if we can bleed that into a couple of extra days of the week, we've made some real progress.
No doubt. So we talked about you proposed to your wife on a boat. Tell us a little bit about that. What was that like? That was kind of a GQ move, man. I like it.
Oh, funny. If she's downstairs, if she's listening to this, she's gonna remind me, like, hey, what's the last time you took me out for dinner? I've been busy, but we were, we'd been dating for a few years. I was coming from a football game in Fargo, North Dakota, go to Seattle, and I had the ring with me. So you know how nerve-wracking, right? Like when you're carrying the ring with you, it was nerve-wracking. And so I had one of her friends, her and I were kind of in cahoots. We had this plan.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife's from the Seattle area. So I had this boat ride planned. And so she had no idea what's going on. So I said, hey, just have a little thing planned. I know we got to see your family and we got to see your friends. And we have all this stuff. But, hey, just one day, well, what are you doing? Like, this is my town. You're planning something. Let me just plan something. You go with it. So we're at lunch, and the dock was by the Museum of what was it? The Museum of History and Industry.
Okay.
And so we're going to the Museum of History and Industry. And she looks at me and she goes, "That's your surprise? It's the worst idea ever." Just wait. So we go down to this Museum of History and Industry. We walk past it. She's like, "I thought we're going in there." I go, No. I got something better planned. And there was this boat. And so I take her on the boat. It was supposed to be a sunset boat ride, but it was Seattle in December, so the sun wasn't out. He had roses, warm peaches, and then halfway through, I said, "Hey, do you mind taking a picture of us?" And that's when I proposed. And then I had a Hummer limo pick up all her friends and her sisters.
Oh, that's cool.
So they were driving around stalling. And then when we got off the dock, they were all there waiting for her. So we got to have our little moment, and then she could celebrate with her sisters and her friends.
So at first she said zero move to hero move once she saw everything. Yeah. I'll say this. I love Seattle. Seattle's a great town. I tell people all the time, having played up there, University of Washington, and call games with the Seahawks, and played actually against the Seahawks. Their fans are you talk about a town that just loves ball. I love going to Seattle.
Yeah, the 12th man is something else, and all my in-laws are Seahawks fans, so it'll be fun to see them when the Panthers go beat them this year up in Seattle.
I got you. Well, hey, man, we're going to head to the 2-minute warning. I'm going to get you out of here with some fun. I'm going to let you try to march down the field. You wanted to play quarterback growing up if you were a tennis guy. So let's see you march down the field, hit the tight end, and stride. Okay, so what was your favorite food to dip Duke's Mayo Bowl?
PJ, hands down.
Why was that?
Well, I mean, really by default, the donut and the mayo did not go well together. The Oreo and the mayo did not start off well, had an okay aftertaste. PB&J double dip. So by default, that was the best of the three.
And you let Golick talk you into a lot of that. So that's D lineman, right? he was trying to do it the whole game. I was watching you guys. I was cracking up.
That dude has one of the most insane diets of all time. And I use the word diet loosely. I mean, on the road, guy, when we were in Starkville and at Ole Miss, gas station chicken on a stick in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Don't every place go to. I've never seen a human being scarf down food faster. I'm like, dude, nobody's taking your food away. We'd be shuffling it into his mouth like he's never had a meal before. I go, your dad was Mike Golick Sr. You lived a pretty charmed life, and he eats like he's Oliver Twist.
Well, we're marching down the field. Nice little completion there. What do tasty cakes mean to you?
Cakes. Tasty cakes is a Philly thing, and I'm a North Jersey guy, but we had a lot of tasty cakes when I grew up in New Jersey, so that reminds me of home.
Okay, all right, that's good. Were you terrified or fearless when swimming with sharks?
Oh my God! I mean, I'm legitimately surprised I didn't soil my pants. I can't. I can't swim. And our producer had this idea to put us in a shark tank. And I remember I'm holding on to this thing, and we have a couple of our colleagues on the other side. Our sideline reporter, Chris Budden, is on the other side of me with the the diver in the middle.
Yeah.
Thought it was hilarious. Like, I'm shaking, and I see these. I mean, these are real live sharks, and I can't swim, and I'm holding on. I'm like bringing my head over the water, and like, you know, and I'm not going to drown. I got all the things on me, but I'm petrified of deep water. And now you throw sharks in there. I mean, come on.
Who did it with you? Chris Button, and was it Golick or who?
It was our old analyst. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's crazy. And the thing about it, man, I've never done that. I've done a lot of things, but I heard that's the intensity level of that off the chart.
I mean, it was in a controlled environment. We were in an aquarium. I am telling you, I was petrified. I was legitimately shaking.
Who's your favorite athlete of all time? Sport.
Oh, it's a great question. You know, you default to Michael Jordan just because, again, I'm always into the story, and there was such a mythology to his story. But I would say probably, you know, a toss-up between Michael Jordan and Don Mattingly, those two.
Okay, cool. You're getting down the field. You're marching there. Will Coach K's record ever be broken?
For career wins?
Yes.
If Jim Boeheim coaches long enough, yeah, I do think so.
Yeah, that's why I had to ask you that. I knew you were about the Syracuse guy in there. You think knowing Coach Boeheim like you do and spending time there, you think he'll stick around as long as he can to break that record? Because he's competitive as hell too. I like both of them.
76, 77 years old. There doesn't seem to be an end in sight. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly. I mean, if I were to bet, I would say yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we scored a touchdown, got it done. Anish, hey, man, I really appreciate this. It's been good. We got to do it again, and we'll do it. We'll be somewhere and sitting down and sitting across from each other.
I appreciate it, Buck. Pleasure as always, my friend.
All right, man. Thanks a lot for coming on this episode of Chopping It Up with Buck.